10 years had passed since the humans left, and the great chamber of the Galactic Council was dark. Drelvas walked through the abandoned hall, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Dust covered the seats where 17 species had once gathered to rule the galaxy. The lights that represented each star system had gone out long ago. The walls were cracked, the floor was broken, and shadows filled every corner. The council no longer existed. After his return from human space, Drelvas had tried to share what he had learned. He had told them about Hannah Yoon's words, about the human worlds he had seen, about the chance for redemption. Some had listened. Most had not. The High Crystal had called him a traitor. The Morath had accused him of lying. The Sylphan had demanded he be arrested for making contact with the enemy, as if the humans, who had only ever helped them, had somehow become enemies simply by leaving. But reality could not be denied forever. The war between the Korath and the Sylphan had finally ended, but only because both species were too weak to continue fighting. Their fleets were destroyed, their colonies burned, their populations reduced by more than half. The survivors had no energy left for hatred. The Morath Plague had run its course, killing 300 million before it finally burned itself out. The survivors were broken, traumatized, struggling to rebuild a civilization that had lost most of its people and all of its pride. The Veleth had splintered into factions, each blaming the others for the collapse. Their beautiful crystal cities, once the wonder of the galaxy, now stood empty and crumbling. 3 species had gone extinct entirely: the North, the Valari, and the Kemeth, destroyed by wars or plagues or simple despair. Their worlds were silent now, monuments to a civilization that had eaten itself from within. 7 more species had withdrawn from Council space, fleeing to isolated corners of the galaxy where they hoped to survive alone. Only a handful remained, scattered across the ruins of what had once been the greatest civilization in history. Drelvas left the council chamber and walked outside. Nexus Prime was dying. The station that had been the heart of galactic civilization was now a ghost. Its corridors empty, its systems failing, its population reduced to a few thousand stubborn souls who refused to leave. He found a bench in an old park, a park that humans had planted centuries ago, and sat down heavily. He was old now, his body weak, his mind tired. He had spent 10 years trying to change things. 10 years of failure. But not complete failure. He pulled out the device that Hannah Yoon had given him and looked at it carefully. He had never used it. He had wanted the galaxy to save itself, to prove that it could change without human help. And in small ways, it had. The Uthari had been the first. After the council collapsed, they had looked at the destruction around them and made a choice. They would become what the humans had been. They would help without expecting payment. They would serve without demanding recognition. They would teach and heal and build, simply because it was right. It had started small. A Uthari medical team traveling to Morath space to help with plague survivors. A Uthari engineering crew helping to repair Sylphan ships. A Uthari school opening on a devastated Korath world. Other species had watched with suspicion at first. The Uthari had always been cold and logical. Why would they suddenly start helping others? But as time passed, the suspicion faded. The Uthari asked for nothing. They took nothing. They simply helped. Slowly, painfully, others began to follow. The remaining Morath, humbled by the plague, started sharing their resources with species they had once ignored. The surviving Korath and Sylphan, tired of war, began working together to rebuild what they had destroyed. Even the proud Veleth, their civilization shattered, started learning the value of cooperation. It was not a new council. There were no grand chambers, no formal treaties, no hierarchy of power. It was something smaller and simpler, a network of species helping each other survive, learning to see value in all life, slowly building something new from the ashes of the old. Drelvis watched all of this with quiet hope. It was not enough. It would take generations to undo the damage that had been done. But it was a beginning. A ship landed in the park, and a young Yadari stepped out. His name was Threv, and he was Drelvis's grandchild, one of the new generation that had never known the old council, only the struggle to build something better. "Grandfather," Threv said, sitting beside him, "the Survivors' Council is meeting tomorrow. They want you to speak." Drelvis shook his head slowly. "I've said everything I can say. It's your turn now. Your generation's turn." Threv was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you think they'll ever come back? The humans?" Drelvis looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the mapped regions of space, humanity was living and growing and building their own civilization. They were watching. He knew. Waiting. "President Yoon told me something 10 years ago," Drelvis said. "She said that humans would return if the galaxy changed. If it became a place where their children could live with dignity." He turned to look at his grandchild. "We are changing, Threv. Slowly, painfully, but we are changing. Perhaps someday, that will be enough." Threv nodded. "I hope so. The stories about them, the things they did, the way they helped everyone without asking for anything in return, they sound like something from a legend." "They were not legends," Drelvis said firmly. "They were real people. People who were kind when they didn't have to be. People who gave when they had every reason to take. People who showed us what we could be, if only we had listened." He stood up slowly, his old joints aching. "Come, walk with me. I want to show you something." They walked through the dying station until they reached the old human quarter. It was abandoned now, like most of Nexus Prime, but someone had been maintaining one small area. The memorial still stood in the central plaza. The stone with its simple words, "They came in friendship. They left in sorrow. May we someday deserve their return." Around the memorial, the new generation had added their own tributes. Flowers from a dozen worlds. Messages of gratitude in 100 languages. Small tokens left by people who had never met a human but had heard the stories and wanted to say thank you. Threv stared at the memorial in silence. Then he knelt and added something of his own, a small crystal, the kind that Yidari gave only to those they truly honored. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything you taught us, for everything you sacrificed, for believing we could be better, even when we gave you no reason to believe." Drelvis put a hand on his grandchild's shoulder. "That is why we keep working, Threv. That is why we keep trying. Not for power, not for glory, but to become the people they always hoped we could be." They stood in silence as the stars wheeled overhead, the empty stars where humanity had once traveled, the dark spaces where their light had once shone. Somewhere out there, humanity was waiting, watching, hoping, and in the ruins of the old galaxy, a new one was slowly being born. It would take generations. It would take pain and sacrifice and endless effort. But someday, perhaps the galaxy would be ready. Someday, humanity might return. And on that day, they would not return as servants. They would return as equals, as family, as friends. Drelvis closed his eyes and made a silent promise to the humans who had left, to the species who remained, to all the generations yet to come. "We will become what you believed we could be. We will earn your trust. We will deserve your return. And when you come back, we will welcome you home." The stars continued their ancient dance, patient and eternal, holding space for the reunion that would one day come. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Now it had to prove it. One kind act at a time. One generation at a time. Forever. 5 years had passed since the humans left, and Drelvis had finally found them. He had spent the last 3 years searching. He had traveled to the edges of mapped space, following rumors and whispers. He had bribed smugglers, questioned traders, and studied ancient star charts that showed regions no council ship had ever visited. Most thought he was mad. Perhaps he was. But he had to know. His small ship dropped out of hyperspace at the coordinates he had gathered, and Drelvis felt his heart stop. Before him lay a cluster of stars that did not exist on any council map. And around those stars orbited worlds, dozens of them covered in lights and activity and life. He had found humanity's new home. His communication system crackled to life. Unknown vessel, you have entered Human Coalition territory. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. Drelvis took a deep breath. This is Counselor Drelvis of the Yathari. I come alone, without weapons, seeking only to speak with your leaders. I mean no harm. There was a long pause. Then the voice returned, warmer now. Counselor Drelvis, we know your name. You were a friend to humans when friendship was rare. You are welcome here. They guided his ship to the capital world, a green and blue planet that reminded him of pictures he had seen of Earth. As he descended through the atmosphere, he saw cities that blended with nature instead of destroying it. He saw forests and rivers and mountains untouched by the pollution that covered most council worlds. He saw children playing in parks, families walking together, people living without fear. It was beautiful. More beautiful than anything he had ever seen. They brought him to a simple building in the capital city. No grand palace, no towering monument, just a comfortable place where people worked and talked and made decisions together. Human democracy, he realized. They had taken it with them when they left. A woman met him at the door. She was old, her hair gray and her face lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and kind. He recognized her from the files he had studied. Hannah Yoon, once a junior diplomat in the council, now the president of the Human Coalition. Counselor Drelvis, she said, extending her hand. I remember you. You came to my office once 20 years ago, asking about human history. You were one of the few who seemed genuinely curious. Drelvis took her hand carefully, aware of how fragile human bodies could be. President Yoon, I have traveled very far to ask you a single question. Hannah nodded and led him inside. They sat in a simple room with windows overlooking a garden. Tea was served, a human tradition that Drelvis had always found charming. Ask your question, Hannah said. Drelvis looked into his cup, watching the steam rise. Why? Why did you leave us? Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Outside, birds sang in the garden. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed. Do you know how humans came to join the council? She finally asked. Your first ships reached council space 3 centuries ago. You were welcomed as a new member species. Welcomed. Hannah smiled, but there was no joy in it. Is that what the records say? Let me tell you what actually happened. Our first ships arrived, full of hope and wonder. We had dreamed of meeting alien life for thousands of years. We thought it would be the greatest moment in our history. She set down her teacup. Instead, we found a galaxy that looked at us with contempt. We were primitive. We were told, emotional, irrational. We were allowed to join the council only because we were useful. We were willing to do work that other species considered beneath them. For 300 years, we accepted this. We believed that if we worked hard enough, if we proved ourselves, the other species would eventually accept us as equals. We built their stations. We healed their sick. We taught their children. We flew into danger to save their lives. And in return, they laughed at us. Drelvis lowered his head. I know. I saw it. I tried to change it. Yes, you did. You and a few others. But it was never enough. Hannah stood and walked to the window. 5 years before we left, I attended a council ceremony honoring the heroes of the Velith Plague crisis. Hundreds of human doctors had worked for years to stop that plague. 37 of them died doing it. And at that ceremony, not a single human was mentioned. Not one? She turned to face him. That was when I knew. It didn't matter how much we gave. It didn't matter how many of us died in their service. They would never see us as equals. They would never even see us at all. So you left. So we left. We found these stars, far beyond council reach. We built new worlds, new cities, a new civilization. And for the first time in 3 centuries, we remembered what it felt like to live for ourselves instead of for others. Drelva stood and joined her at the window. The capital city stretched before them, peaceful and thriving. President Yoon, I must tell you what has happened since you left. I know what has happened. We have listened. Then you know that millions have died. Wars, plagues, the collapse of trade and communication. The council has shattered. 7 species have withdrawn. 3 are extinct. Everything we built is falling apart. Hannah nodded slowly. Yes, we know. And you feel no responsibility? No guilt? Hannah turned to look at him directly. Her eyes were filled not with anger, but with a deep, tired sadness. Counselor, for 300 years, humans carried the galaxy on our shoulders. We solved problems that weren't ours. We saved lives that weren't ours. We gave and gave and gave until we had nothing left. And the entire time, we were told that we were worthless. She took his hand gently. We did not cause the wars. We did not create the plagues. We did not break the systems that are now failing. We simply stopped fixing everyone else's mistakes. The problems you face existed long before we left. We were just hiding them from you. Then what should we do? Drelvas asked. It came out almost as a plea. Learn, Hannah said simply. Learn to help yourselves. Learn to help each other. Learn that a civilization cannot survive on pride and contempt. Learn that the people who serve others deserve respect, not mockery. She walked him back to the door. The galaxy spent 12,000 years building a society based on looking down on those who do the hard work. Now that society is collapsing. Perhaps from its ruins, something better can be built. Drelvis paused at the door. Will you ever return? Hannah smiled a real smile this time, warm but cautious. Perhaps. If the galaxy changes. If it becomes a place where our children can live with dignity. We are not angry, Counselor. We are simply tired of being hurt. She handed him a small device. Take this. It will allow you to contact us if there is ever true need. But understand, we will not come back to serve. If we return, it will be as equals or not at all. Drelvis took the device and held it like a sacred object. Thank you, President Yoon, for your time, for your honesty, for everything your people did for us, even when we didn't deserve it. Hannah nodded. Thank you for coming, Counselor. You give us hope that someday the galaxy might change. Drelvis returned to his ship and flew back toward Council space. Behind him, the human worlds glittered like jewels in the darkness. Before him, the ruins of a dying civilization waited. He had his answer. Now he had to decide what to do with it. The reckoning had come, and it was time for the galaxy to choose its future. 2 years had passed since the humans left, and the galaxy was burning. The war between the Korath and the Silthan had spread beyond anyone's control. What began as a simple mining dispute had become a conflict that consumed entire star systems. Both sides blamed the other. Both sides demanded justice. And with no one to negotiate peace, both sides chose destruction. The third planet of the Varus system had been beautiful once. Green forests, blue oceans, cities that shined like jewels. Now it was ash and smoke. The Korath had bombed it from orbit, killing 40 million Sylthan civilians in a single day. The Sylthan responded by destroying a Korath colony world. 60 million dead. Then the Korath struck again, and the Sylthan struck back, and the cycle of death continued without end. The High Crystal addressed the Council with growing frustration. "This war must stop," he declared. "It threatens the stability of the entire galaxy." "Then stop it," the Morath delegate growled. "You are the leader of the Council. Lead." But the High Crystal had no idea how to stop a war. The Veleth were scientists and artists, not diplomats. They had never needed to negotiate peace, because humans had always done it for them. Now, there were no humans, and the Veleth discovered that they had no skills for ending conflicts. They tried sending messages to both sides, demanding a ceasefire. The messages were ignored. They tried threatening sanctions against both species. The threats were laughed at. They tried offering to mediate. Neither side trusted them. 3 more worlds burned while the Council debated what to do. Far from the war, in the depths of Morath space, a different disaster was unfolding. The plague had appeared without warning. It started on a small colony, killing a few hundred people in the first week. Doctors studied it, tried to treat it, and failed. Within a month, it had spread to 5 more worlds. The symptoms were terrible. First came the fever, burning so hot that it left permanent scars. Then came the weakness, muscles failing until victims could not even stand. Finally came the madness, as the disease attacked the brain and destroyed all rational thought. There was no cure. There was no treatment. There was only death. Gran Hila Voreth worked without sleep, studying samples and running experiments. She was the finest medical mind the Morath had ever produced, yet she could not understand this disease. It seemed to attack every system at once, adapting to every treatment she tried. Her assistant brought her a file one morning, his hands shaking. "Gran Healer, I found something. This plague appeared before, 80 years ago, on a human colony world." Voreth grabbed the file and read it quickly. The disease had been exactly the same. The fever, the weakness, the madness. It had killed thousands before being stopped. How did they stop it? She demanded. A human medical team developed a cure. It took them 2 years of research. The formula is in their databases. Then get it. Her assistant lowered his head. "The databases are gone, Gran Healer. The humans took everything when they left. Their medical records, their research, their formulas. All of it is beyond our reach." Voreth stared at the file in her hands. 80 years ago, humans had solved this problem. They had saved millions of Morath lives, asking for nothing in return. And the Morath had never even thanked them. Now those same humans were gone, and the plague was back, and there was no one left who knew how to fight it. The death toll reached 1 million, then 10 million, then 50 million. Entire worlds went silent, their populations wiped out. The Morath fleet tried to establish quarantine zones, but the plague moved faster than their failing ships could travel. It spread through cargo vessels, through refugee ships, through the very trade routes that connected Morath civilization. By the end of the second year, 200 million Morath had died. Captain Ji Woo Choi sat in the command center of the Homeward, listening to the messages coming from Council space. They had established a listening post on the edge of the known galaxy, far enough from Council territory that no one could find them, close enough that they could still receive transmissions. Every day, more desperate pleas arrived. "This is the Veleth Medical Institute. We are requesting any contact with human doctors. Please respond. Please. This is the Morath Grand Fleet. We need engineers. Our ships are dying. We will pay any price. This is the Sylphan Trade Authority. The relay network is failing. We cannot communicate with our colonies. We begged for assistance. Jiwoo deleted each message without responding. Her first officer, Do-Hyun Lee, watched with a troubled expression. Some of those people are innocent, he said quietly. Children, families, people who never did anything wrong. Jiwoo nodded slowly. I know, and it breaks my heart. But if we go back, what happens? We save them this time, and they go back to treating us like servants. They learn nothing. They change nothing. So we just let them suffer? We let them grow. Jiwoo turned to face him. My grandmother worked in a council hospital for 60 years. She saved thousands of Velith lives. And when she died, not a single one of them came to her funeral. They didn't even know her name. She looked back at the screens, at the desperate messages scrolling across them. The council doesn't need our help. They need to learn how to help themselves. And the only way that happens is if we're not there to carry them. Do-Hyun was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. I understand, Captain. I just wish it didn't have to be this way. So do I, Jiwoo said softly. So do I. On Nexus Prime, the great station that had been the heart of galactic civilization, the lights were failing. The power systems had been designed by humans, maintained by humans, and understood only by humans. Now they were breaking down, one by one, and no one knew how to repair them. Drelvis walked through the darkening corridors, remembering how different things had been just 2 years ago. The station had been alive then, full of noise and activity and hope. Now it felt like a tomb. He passed the old human quarter, now completely abandoned. The shops were empty, their windows dark. The schools were silent. The parks had withered and died without anyone to tend them. A memorial stood in the central plaza, erected by someone unknown. It was simple, just a stone with words carved into it. They came in friendship. They left in sorrow. May we someday deserve their return. Drelvis stood before the memorial for a long time. The council had made a choice 300 years ago when the first human ships arrived. They had chosen to look down on these newcomers, to use them without respecting them, to take their gifts while mocking their givers. Now the bill for that choice had come due, and the price was higher than anyone had imagined. 3 worlds burned in endless war. 200 million lay dead from plague. The relay network was failing. The ships were dying. The lights were going out. And somewhere in the unknown reaches of space, humanity watched and waited and wondered if the galaxy would ever learn from its mistakes. The unraveling had begun, and there was no one left to stop it. 6 months had passed since the humans left, and the Velith Medical Institute was in chaos. Director Mavel stood before a wall of screens, each one showing a different patient. They were dying. Slowly, painfully, and completely without hope. The disease eating through their crystalline bodies had no name, no cure, and no explanation. This is impossible, Mavel said to his assistant. We are the most advanced medical species in the galaxy. How can we not solve this? His assistant, a young Velith named Torres, pulled up an old file. Director, I found something. This disease appeared once before, 40 years ago. It killed thousands before it was stopped. And how was it stopped? Torres hesitated. The humans stopped it. A doctor named Soman Beek. She spent 3 years studying our biology and developed a treatment. The records say she worked without payment, without recognition. She simply wanted to help. Mavel stared at the screen. He remembered Dr. Beek, a small, quiet woman who had visited the institute many times. She had tried to teach them her methods, but they had refused to learn from a primitive species. They had taken her treatment and forgotten her name. Contact the Human Coalition, Mavel ordered. Ask for Dr. Beek. Sir, there is no way to contact them. All their communication channels are closed. We don't even know where they went. Mavel's crystal body made a sound like cracking ice. It was the Velith expression of fear. Across the galaxy, the Morris shipyards faced a different crisis. The great vessels that had carried their empire for 10,000 years were failing. Engines that had run perfectly for centuries now sputtered and died. Navigation systems showed errors that no one could understand. Hull plates cracked for no apparent reason. Shipmaster Corvin walked through his dying fleet with growing horror. These ships were his life. His father had worked on them, and his father's father before that. The Morith had always been proud of their vessels, the finest in the galaxy, but they had a secret that Corvin only now understood. They had forgotten how to build them. Long ago, the Morith had been great engineers. But as the centuries passed, they had grown lazy. They relied on automated systems to maintain their ships, systems that were now failing. And when those systems had problems, they had called the humans. Corvin found an old maintenance log from 10 years ago. A human engineer named Junho Shin had spent 6 months on this very ship, teaching the Morith workers how to repair systems they had forgotten. He had written detailed manuals, created training programs, and begged them to learn. They had ignored him. Why learn difficult skills when the humans would always be there to help? Now Junho Shin was gone, along with every other human engineer. And the Morith fleet was dying. On the council station, a Yadari researcher named Drelvas was beginning to see a pattern. The Yadari were an insectoid species, known for their logic and careful analysis. They did not make emotional decisions. They did not panic. They simply studied problems until they found solutions. Drelvas had been studying humanity for decades. At first, it was simply academic curiosity. Humans were an unusual species, short-lived, emotional, often irrational. Yet somehow, they had spread across council space and made themselves useful in countless ways. Now, with the humans gone, Drelvas was seeing just how useful they had been. He created a document called the Human Impact Assessment. It grew longer every day. Human teachers had been working on backwater colonies, educating children of species that had no schools of their own. Now those colonies were silent, their young growing up without knowledge. Human doctors had been serving in the poorest sectors, treating patients who could not afford Velith medicine. Now those patients were dying from diseases that should have been simple to cure. Human diplomats had been mediating disputes between hostile species, preventing small conflicts from becoming wars. Now those conflicts were growing, spreading, threatening to consume entire systems. Human engineers had been maintaining the deep space relay network, the system of satellites and stations that made interstellar communication possible. Now that network was failing, piece by piece, and no one knew how to fix it. Drelvas brought his report to the council. He spoke for 3 hours, presenting evidence that could not be denied. The humans had not been passengers in the galactic community. They had been the ones keeping it running. They worked the jobs no one else wanted, Drelvas explained. They went to places no one else would go. They helped species who could not help themselves. And they asked for nothing in return except basic respect. The High Crystal listened with obvious impatience. And your conclusion? My conclusion is that we made a terrible mistake. We should have treated them as equals. We should have valued their contributions. Instead, we drove them away, and now we are beginning to see the consequences. The Sylphan delegate hissed with annoyance. This is sentimental nonsense. The humans were a minor species with limited capabilities. We managed perfectly well for 12,000 years before they arrived. We will manage without them. Drelvas shook his head. No, we won't. Because for the last 300 years, they were the ones actually managing things. We just didn't notice because we were too proud to look. The council voted to reject his report. The High Crystal called it fear-mongering and ordered Drelvas to stop his research. The matter was officially closed, but the cracks continued to spread. A supply convoy was lost in deep space when its navigation system failed. 200,000 tons of food, meant for a colony of 3 million. By the time replacement supplies arrived, 10,000 had starved. A hospital on a Velith world ran out of a critical medicine. The formula had been developed by humans, and no one else knew how to make it. 3,000 patients died, waiting for a cure that would never come. A border dispute between the Korath and the Silthan turned violent. In the past, human negotiators would have stepped in, finding compromises that satisfied both sides. Now there was no one to stop the fighting. A single mining station became a battleground, then a massacre. Drelvas watched it all with growing despair. He had tried to warn them. He had shown them the truth, but they refused to see it. Late at night, he sat in his quarters and looked at a photograph on his desk. It showed him standing with a human colleague named Mingio, a researcher who had worked with him for 20 years. She had been brilliant, curious, and endlessly kind. When she left with the others, she had given him the photograph as a gift. "Remember us?" she had said. "Not as we were treated, but as we truly were." Drelvas touched the image with one clawed hand. "I remember," he whispered. "I just wish the others did too." Outside his window, the lights of Nexus Prime stretched across the darkness. 6 months ago, those lights had seemed eternal. Symbols of a civilization that would last forever. Now, for the first time, Drelvas noticed how many of them had gone dark. The first cracks had appeared. Soon, they would become something much worse. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room ever built by intelligent life. Its walls stretched upward for nearly a kilometer, covered in lights that represented every star system under Council rule. 17 species had gathered here for 12,000 years to decide the fate of the galaxy. They called themselves the Elder Races, and they believed they had achieved perfection. Una Park stood at the speaker's platform, looking up at the assembled delegates. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She had served as humanity's ambassador for 30 years. In all that time, she had never raised her voice in this chamber. Today would be no different. The Velith delegate sat in the highest position. His body was made of living crystal, and when he moved, he made sounds like wind chimes. His name was impossible for human tongues to pronounce, so everyone simply called him the High Crystal. He looked down at Una with something like boredom. "You requested emergency speaking time," he said. His voice echoed through the chamber. "This is unusual for your species. You typically remain silent during our proceedings." Una nodded. "Yes, High Crystal. We have remained silent for 300 years. We listened. We learned. We hoped." She paused. "Today, we speak for the last time." She pulled out a small device and pressed a button. Her words appeared on every screen in the chamber, translated into 17 languages. "The Human Coalition hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council. This decision is final. We will leave all Council space within 30 standard days. We will take nothing that belongs to others. We ask for nothing in return. We simply wish to say goodbye." For a moment, there was silence. Then the Morth delegate, a massive creature that looked like a bear covered in scales, began to laugh. Others joined him. The sound filled the chamber like thunder. The High Crystal raised one crystalline hand, and the laughter stopped. "Ambassador Park," he said, "this is most amusing. But surely you understand that no species has ever left the Council. Where would you go? The galaxy belongs to us." Una smiled. It was a sad smile, the kind that comes after years of disappointment. "The galaxy is larger than you know, High Crystal, and we have been preparing for this day for a very long time." In the observation balcony above, Admiral Taiho Kim watched the scene below. He was an old soldier, his face marked by scars from battles fought in humanity's defense. Beside him stood Captain Jiwoo Choi, commander of the vessel Homeward. "They're laughing," Jiwoo said quietly. "After everything we've done for them, they're laughing." Taiho nodded slowly. "Let them laugh. They will stop soon enough." Below, the council delegates were already moving on to other business. The human withdrawal was treated as a minor matter, barely worth discussing. The Sylphan delegate, a serpentine creature with silver scales, suggested that humanity's departure might actually improve council efficiency. "They were always asking questions," she hissed, "always wanting to help with matters that did not concern them." The others agreed. Humans were emotional. Humans were primitive. Humans had been tolerated only because they were useful for simple labor and dangerous missions. Now they were leaving, and the galaxy would be better for it. Yuna gathered her documents and walked out of the chamber. No one said goodbye. No one even looked at her. Outside, a transport was waiting. Taiho and Jiwoo met her at the door. "It's done," Yuna said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. 300 years of trying to earn their respect. 300 years of being treated like children. "It's finally done." Taiho put a hand on her shoulder. "You did your duty, Ambassador. Now let's go home." The transport lifted off and flew toward the human quarter of Nexus Prime, the great station that served as the Council's capital. Already, the evacuation was underway. Human families carried their belongings to waiting ships. Human workers shut down the businesses they had built. Human doctors closed their clinics. Human teachers closed their schools. Human engineers powered down the systems they had maintained for generations. They worked in silence. There were no protests, no angry speeches, no demands for justice. They simply packed their things and left. Da-Hyun Lee, first officer of the Homeward, supervised the loading of supplies. He was a young man, born on Nexus Prime, and he had never known any home but this station. Yet he felt no sadness as he watched his childhood neighborhood go dark. "My grandmother used to tell me stories," he said to a fellow officer, "about Earth, about what we were before we joined the Council. She said we used to dream of the stars. We thought meeting other species would be wonderful." He shook his head. "She died still believing that someday they would accept us." Across the station, similar scenes played out. Humans who had spent their entire lives serving the Council now walked away without looking back. They had given everything, their skills, their knowledge, their kindness, and received nothing but contempt in return. The Marth dock workers watched them go with confusion. "Who will fix the old ships now?" one of them asked. No one had an answer. The Yadari medical researchers watched the human doctors leave and felt a strange unease. There were experiments in progress, patients who needed care, problems that only the humans knew how to solve. But it was too late to ask them to stay. By the end of the 30 days, every human had departed from Council space. Their jump gates technology they had shared freely with the Council went dark. Their communication relays fell silent. The coordinates of their new home were erased from every database. The High Crystal addressed the Council on the day the last human ship disappeared. "Let this be a lesson," he announced. "The galaxy has no room for weakness. Humanity chose to leave because they could not meet our standards. We are stronger without them." The delegates applauded. They congratulated themselves on their wisdom and superiority. They made jokes about the foolish humans who had abandoned the greatest civilization in history. None of them noticed the silence that had already begun to spread. None of them saw the cracks that were forming in the foundation of their perfect society. In the darkness between stars, the human fleet traveled toward their new home. Yuna stood on the bridge of the lead ship, watching the Council's territory fade from view. "Do you think they'll be all right?" Jiwoo asked. Yuna was quiet for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "But that is no longer our concern. We gave them 300 years of our best. Now it's time to give that to ourselves." The ships jumped to hyperspace, and humanity vanished from the known galaxy. The Galactic Council celebrated their departure for 3 days. They would not celebrate again for a very long time.